Hey, hey, welcome back to Repairs of the Breach, coming out of Babylon and returning to the Way Come Home Ministries, whatever you want to call us. But we're excited to be back in session. This is number 2 of our masterclass. And last week, just to recap a little bit, we watched half of a video that is called Belly of the Beast. We feel it's important to kind of kick off the masterclass with this information because it is foundational, I feel, to understanding the enemy's plan, and that the enemy has had this plan for since the beginning of time, really. And so unfortunately, he used America and the forefathers in part of that, but there's always a redemptive side to everything. And Yah also used America to preserve his truth and his people. So we're going to continue to take a deeper dive into what that really looks like. We felt a calling to return to the ancient paths rooted out of Jeremiah 6:16. And Jenny will share more of that testimony with you later down the line. However, we feel it is critical, again, as we shared last week, that due to the fact that we really are in a spiritual war, we need to understand how to fight this spiritual battle. And I think a lot of us have a tendency, again, just to turn a blind eye and pretend like the evil doesn't exist or the enemy doesn't exist. However, this does not make it go away. What this allows it to do is manifest and grow larger, and allows it not to have a force to counteract it. So we are that force. We are the light bearers to bring light amongst the darkness. But if we're turning a blind eye to the darkness and just pretending it doesn't exist, then how are we going to really counter the enemy? So we're going to continue this video. Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I mean, that about sums it up. I mean, I might at the end or discuss some of it, but let's get started.
All right, great. Well, we're going to continue with the rest of this video. And then afterwards, we're going to dive right into what ecumenicism is and what that looks like in present day church today.
Everything we thought
it logged me out. Hang on just a second. And I already logged it in, so this is annoying. Come on.
Facts. Numbers in any direct line, horizontally, vertically, the numbers always equal 1.
Hey, Allison. Allison. We can't hear. I can hear you, but I can't hear.
Is important to a magic Apollonian square used for raising the spirit of Apollo are incorporated into the design of the Washington Monument. Now, what most Americans also don't know is right over here, beneath the ground, is a miniature obelisk made to look just like this one, except it's only 12 feet tall, 12 being the number of the perfect government that will be incorporated when the Novus Ordo Seclorum prophecy comes to its fruition and the man of sin becomes Apollo in flesh.
One of the reoccurring elements of occult rituals, both ancient and modern, is numerology. The basic principles hold that numbers have a great deal of magical and spiritual magnitude. Some numbers are more potent and carry more power than others, and strategic combinations of certain numbers can render specific magical effects. Additionally, numbers also tie into planetary significance within rituals.
In the magical Hebrew Kabbalah, each planet is associated with a number, intelligence, or spirit. The intelligence of the sun is Nakel, which equals 111, while the spirit of the sun is Soroth and equals 666. It makes sense, therefore, that Freemasons built the Washington Monument obelisk to form a magic square at its base, the exact values of the binding square of the sun god Apollo Osiris installed in the ceiling above where the Osiris ceremony is conducted, in the house of the temple. 111 is also the number of the Trinity, both dark and light. Now, when you compare the raising ceremony that's held at the Herodome beneath a magic 666 square to the Washington obelisk, there's some interesting facts. In fact, the same Bible that Dan Brown called the lost symbol is a Bible that was placed in a magic binding square inside the testes of the Washington obelisk of Osiris, the Washington Monument, the purpose of which is to restrain the Bible's influence, just as it is in the Herodome, while allowing the seed of Osiris to materialize.
In order for the powerful deceivers to bring about their demonic will through magic, they attempt to attack their eternal enemy, the God of the Bible. Not only are these men seeking to raise the spirit of Osiris and bring about the kingdom of the Antichrist, but they feel the need to bind the power of the living God in order to level the playing field of the last days. But unfortunately for them, there is no binding the word of God or even remotely constraining the power of the Most High. This is a great example of them trying to manifest their will into reality via ancient magic rituals of numerology. One 20th century specimen who enacted similar rituals, dedicating his every breath to magic and numerology, is none other than Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley is a Luciferian Moses, if you will, with the law of the darkest ancient magic and a proven occult track record of success. Aleister Crowley's magic and influence has been seen distinctly throughout secret societies and in the lives of celebrities, politicians, and presidents, as well as spawning various cultural movements. His themes and writings have been vastly present in popular music, television shows, and films. It's practically impossible to separate the Crowleyan ties from the spiritual shifts that we've seen in the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. His dark shadow continues to lurk over humanity as the occult prophecies persist through the end of this age.
Aleister Crowley was born in England in 1875. He was born as the only son of a very wealthy brewing family. He went to the finest prep schools and was able to enter King's College, Cambridge, where he studied at one of the most auspicious universities in the UK. While he was there at that university, he became interested in three things: poetry, mountaineering, and the occult, and studied everything he could. And he heard about an invisible college, something that the Rosicrucians used for their secret society, and he wanted to investigate and find out what this invisible college was. And it led him to join the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a post-Masonic secret society. That means that it was beyond Masonry. So people who entered into it had already gone through all of the grades of Masonry. And he absorbed all the information from the Golden Dawn and went on to start his own religion called Thelema, which he based upon the receipt of the Book of the Law in Egypt in 1904, where he said he received this information from a being called Aiwass. During his life, Crowley wrote about the variety of different spirits that he contacted. Aiwass was one of them. Another one he termed the magician or the wizard. He also did the Alamantra working in New York in 1918, where he came in contact with a being that he drew that looks very similar to what is known today as the gray alien. Crowley thought of himself not just as an occult scholar, but really as a prophet. And he talked to himself as the prophet of the new aeon, this cosmological age that would change current understandings of the world. So he called himself this prophet of the new aeon, and he was the head, and he became the head of the German secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, in 1925. But why I think Crowley is really referenced as one of the most important figures in modern history is that he left a vast repository of writings. You could distill all of his teachings into one simple 11-word, 11-syllable axiom, which is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And that was an important clarion call for later decades in the world, particularly the 1960s, where people like Timothy Leary took that call and promoted licentiousness and drug use through American society and really world society, as many people would pick it up. And that was really his intent. He really wanted to bring on this new age of Horus, which he called the birth of the child, a birth of a new value system, a non-Christian value system. And if you look back on the 20th century history, you can see that that has been an effect upon human civilization.
Crowley, obviously, in his adamant rejection of Christ, it reminds me a little bit like Judas. If your heart is walled up against God and walled against, you become very open for the other side, because that's what the other side is all about. Opposition. Satan, the fallen cherub, is in opposition to God. So when there's a heart that's bent that way, and that heart is angry and so forth, you already got doors being opened. And then when they pursue, demonic presence, dark side presence will only guide people to pursue darker measures so that broader doors can be opened. They do love to possess people, but maybe more than that, they like to use people. 1 Timothy 4:1, where people become vessels, conduits, and the demons then can use them to write those doctrines of demons. Then that influence, look at Crowley's writings. His writings influence far more millions than when he was alive. So he has charged writings, rituals in those writings, the Amalantra working, and the crossing over of the entity LAM, Lamb. This is huge. We're talking about major rituals, and it couldn't have been done without blood. Even his own son died in one of those rituals. They're predatory. They're observers. They're watching. They're looking. And they're always going to come masqueraded. They have the power. The biblical Greek word is meta schizmazotai. It's that verse we read where Satan's able to masquerade as an angel of light. We read the verse quick, but it's real. They have the power, the supra-human power, to alter their presentation without changing their nature. And it's all done and designed for the sake of deception. So in his case, this high-level entity, engages him, and that's part of the initiation for him, from their side initiating him. Of course, he's acquiring presence, power, gaining what he would consider as knowledge from that side, and of course, then he's inspired to write. And from there, he pursued deeper and darker. Sex rituals and sex magic was big on the agenda, as is all the darkest of stuff. And then human and blood sacrifice is involved in it also. Now, some say in the Amalantra working, when Lamb came through, this entity that looks like a big head with two big eyes, it obviously looks like the Greys that eventually came out, later on in the 40s here in the United States, where that presence began to come out and be shown. Step back from that, and the Amalantra working, the people that were at the ritual acknowledge that they know, they could feel and even see something come through the porthole that Crowley in the ritual was creating. They were doing a ritual that opened a doorway, but it was so big that they could see and then feel this entity come through. They always present, whether in ufology, rituals, spirit guides, ascended masters, great white brotherhood, that side's always morphing their presentation so that it's acceptable, excitable to the individuals. No different than Genesis 3. When the fallen cherub came there, he was like the shining one. He not only amazed with what he was speaking, but his presence would have been something to amaze Eve.
Two of the well-known 20th century figures that were heavily influenced by the magic of Aleister Crowley were L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. L. Ron Hubbard was a famous fiction writer, and of course the founder of the popular cult known as the Church of Scientology, while Jack Parsons was arguably one of the most legendary rocket scientists of all time. Both men were highly involved in Crowleyan sex magic rituals.
Both Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were disciples of Aleister Crowley, and they practiced his teaching called Thelema as a philosophy that is defined by the maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." It comes from Crowley's Book of the Law, which can be connected to the spirit cooking ceremonies of the Podesta brothers and Abramovich from the WikiLeaks scandal. But these are entities that are channeled by an incorporeal demon intelligence named Awas. Thelema is a narcissistic ideology that undergirds several esoteric magic societies like the AA and the Ordo Templo Orientis that fundamentally oppose God's moral law. So Satan targets sexuality because procreation is the human capability that comes closest to the divine. And as a result, it's not surprising that sexual perversion and sex magic are essential components of occult rituals. Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard's Babylon working entailed all sorts of aberrant sexual activity. Now, in Thelemic literature, Babylon has three conceptual aspects. Number one is the gateway to the city of the pyramids. Number two is the Scarlet Woman. And number three, the Great Mother. She serves as a portal for sorcerers.
One of the paramount rituals conducted in the 20th century was by two individuals, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. And it became known as the Babylon working.
Babylon working, it was a conjuring of what they thought was called the Whore of Babylon, referred to in Revelation. So they thought the entity was real. Jack Parsons, rocket scientist, performed more than once the Babylon working, which was to bring a demonic high-level power presence into the actual sexual act so that the spirit could be then placed inside the physical side. And at the moment of conception, their view was that spiritual presence would augment. So the moment of conception, there's like an explosion. All of a sudden, the human spirit is there, and that's when life begins. Well, they want to inject that presence, conjure that presence. The goal was to bring about a hybrid being.
The idea of conjuring the Whore of Babylon in this ritual was quite fitting to have taken place in America. The occult world has long desired to revive the spirit of Babylon. The resurrection of the ancient one-world system once failed, but esoterically believed to prevail at the end of this age. These occult prophecies built the framework and ideals for America to become the world's superpower and philosophic empire, the very land foreseen as the final Babylon, and revered as such, not only in the world of mysticism, but also prophetically laid out in the Bible. So on the very land of the revived Babylon, they performed the Babylon working ritual, and the conjuring began.
The Babylon working sex magic rituals that was carried out by L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, happened through the mid-40s into 1946, and the whole purpose of it was to give birth to a magical being, a moon child, described in Crowley's works. And so they used the powerful energy of ninth-degree sex magic, rites that were intended to open a doorway through which the goddess Babylon herself, the archetype divine feminine, might be born, might come into the earth, might appear in human form. Now, Jack Parsons believed that he and L. Ron Hubbard actually accomplished this task of bringing the Whore of Babylon into materialization through a series of rituals that culminated in 1946. Jack Parsons' own biography actually preserves a celebratory statement in which he says that she was embodied in the womb of a female child. And in a fragment from his writings, Parson, who says he's exhausted but also exultant, he declares the work a success and believed that Babylon, in the manner of a dark, immaculate conception, was due to be born to a woman somewhere on earth within 9 months' time. He actually wrote, "Babylon is incarnate upon the earth today, awaiting the proper hour for her manifestation." Now, if one could believe these writings, you would expect that a female child was to be born around 1947, and indeed such an influential feminist was delivered that year, who could offer the most promise for identifying the fruit of Parsons' infamous ritual, and that would be none other than Hillary Rodham Clinton. Intriguingly, Parsons later referred again to the Babylon Scarlet Woman, and this time by a particular name, in his Book of the Antichrist on October 31, 1948, a full 69 years ago, when the female child would have been around 1 year of age. Parsons wrote that the spirit of Babylon came to him, but this time identifying itself as Hilarion, who, he said, would grow on to become an international public figure, dedicating to bringing the work of the Antichrist to fruition. Why is that important? Because the etymology of Hilarion is the arcane Hillary. Now, you have to ask yourself, how many internationally influential feminists were born in 1947 who are named Hillary and that have the potential to become the leader or vice president or influence the election of the President of the United States, the most powerful nation on earth that was dedicated from its inception to the enthronement of Osiris Apollo, who the Bible itself recognizes as Antichrist, and also ask how possible it would be that an entity calling itself Hillary made clear to Jack Parsons 69 years ago that it was dedicated to helping the rise of the man of sin.
According to Bill Clinton, in a number of books, Hillary Clinton has been involved with Wicca, gone to so-called Wicca meetings or, quote, churches in Los Angeles. And she would decorate the White House Christmas tree, according to Gary Aldridge, with occultic-like figurines. That's rather bizarre, I would think. She was involved in communicating with the dead, much like Eleanor Roosevelt did.
All these questions came to my mind recently when reading the WikiLeaks email revelations and remembering how Hillary had hinted that alien disclosure would come if she was elected president, and how the people around her, Abramovich, the Podestas, others close to Hillary, affiliates of hers, were manifest believers in the same UFOs and what they call contiguous aliens, the same that Parsons and Hubbard sought through the Church of Scientology, and so on, that's actually based on an alien called Xenu, as well as being practitioners of the same Crowley occultism that Parsons and Hubbard were devotees of. When you consider all this, it seems to be immediately beyond probability of coincidence that in the days leading up to the last presidential election, these modern Telemas actually believed that Hillary is, or that she could be, the incarnation of the archetype divine feminine, the whore of Babylon, the Hilarion that is set to take the throne of the most powerful nation on earth to assist the Antichrist in his bid to rule the entire world.
This constant theme of the whore of Babylon, or the worship of the Babylonian goddess, saturates the American system, from the steeples of government buildings and cathedrals all the way to the Statue of Liberty off the coast of New York. It has always been a mainstay of the American system. Whether we're dealing with Lady Liberty, Athena, Isis, or even Gaia, we are constantly being inundated with this ancient occult theme of goddess worship across our land. But how would the cabal strategically embed this idea of goddess worship into the culture of the everyday American citizen? How could they condition a society into following after such a perversion on a massive scale?
America's introduction to accepting a pagan worldview in a serious way began April 22nd, 1970. It happened in high schools, it happened in colleges, thousands of high schools and colleges. April 22nd, 1970 was America's first national environmental teach-in, America's first Earth Day. When America's first Earth Day was introduced, the national teach-in, Friends of the Earth put together a handbook called the Environmental Handbook. Really simple. And in the Environmental Handbook, the very first set of essays and articles introduces the reader to a Smokey the Bear Sutra, where Smokey the Bear comes to America's youth as a mystical being coming to crush the butts of the capitalists, to crush out the cigarette butts. Of course, that's the imagery of Smokey the Bear. Crush out the butts of those who see exceptionalism, that see differences, that see uniqueness, that see separation. Now, it doesn't quite say exactly that, but that's what you can read between the lines. Later on in the Environmental Handbook, Lynn White Jr. has an essay. It's a very famous essay. In fact, this essay really set the tone for the environmental movement. The essay demonstrated that Christianity is to blame. The world's ecological crisis rests on Christian shoulders. And until we move away from a Christian worldview, until we move away from a Christian ethos, we will continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis. What's interesting is Lynn White Jr. said what we need is a new religion. We need a new way of looking at the world through a different lens. No longer Christianity, but some other religious construct. Towards the back end of the Environmental Handbook, you have a list of acceptable religions, acceptable religious practices. Buddhism, shamanism, earth-friendly religions. Christianity, right out. No longer necessary. Christianity is the problem. The solution is opening ourselves up to new forms of spirituality, an earth-friendly, earth-centric, earth-loyalty-based spirituality. And that flavoring of the very first Earth Day comes through all the way to now. America was introduced to Gaia, to the Mother Earth, to the ancient idea that the Earth is alive as a spiritual entity on April the 22nd, 1970. When we consider Gaia and Gaia worship, the idea of a great mother, we can go all the way back through ancient times and see elements of her scattered throughout different cultures. Ishtar, Isis, Diana, Athena. What's interesting is the great mother, the great goddess, Gaia, to use that language, because becomes almost an umbrella mother that absorbs all into her, because it's all built around continuity and oneness.
It's even more damning to consider that the city chosen as the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., literally stands for the District of Columbia. The nation's capital was named for the New World's goddess of liberty and was from her 1776 infancy a reincarnated Isis, containing all the necessary attributes of the ancient infernal goddess. Her worship and reverence has spread far beyond pagans and covens and cabals, reaching into public schools, universities, and mainstream beliefs. Out of this occult District of Columbia, the spirit of the goddess seethes continuously.
As we consider the various elements of occult rites, we can't overlook the power of blood. One of the highest forms of magic involves the sacrificing of human life, the spilling of blood. Blood sacrifice has been held to the highest regard for thousands of years, and it is believed to quickly engage the other side.
We interface with this body through the blood. The life is in the blood. So we're connected. We're not just up in the pineal gland. Our whole human spirit is housed and we're plugged in through the blood. There's physics to this. So when you have a blood sacrifice and chemicals are being released in that blood sacrifice, everything's heightened. That's why they want to raise the energies. They want pain and fear and terror. They want all of us to be raised because it helps broaden the door so the spirit can come in and interface, grab into the individuals when the issue of death comes. And that's how they're designed. When death eventually comes, then that gives the complete doorway for the spirits to come over. Then they're on this side.
Moving forward on the ritualistic timeline of America, we find a massive blood sacrifice, plotted and carried out by the deep state globalist cabal, invoking the magic, once again, of Aleister Crowley. Most Americans probably have no inclination that the events of September 11th, 2001 were a web of magic blood rituals, finely crafted and strategically woven with the goal of bringing about the new aeon.
The events of 9/11/2001 were suffused with occult significance. The numbers that were inculcated into the event all had ties back to the occult in general and Aleister Crowley specifically. The numbers of the planes were 11, 93, 77, and 175. In Aleister Crowley's doctrines, 11 was the number of the new aeon, but also the number of magic, as it fused in both the pentagram and the hexagram. So the first plane that hit the two twin towers, which also were an ideogram in the skyline of an 11, was plane 11. The second plane that hit the twin towers was 175, which is a ritual within Crowley's system about the God you adore. The number 77 was very important to Crowley. As we talked about earlier, it was the number of Babylon and the beast conjoined. So 77 plus 77. So 77 was important. It was also the number of Crowley's doctrine, Do What Thou Wilt on steroids, which is Liber Oz, his book 77, which dictates you can do what you want, and if anybody gets in your way, you're allowed to kill them. So that was 77. And the 93 were two numbers that are specific to Aleister Crowley. They represent two doctrines that are within his religion of Thelema, doctrines of agape and Thelema, both of which in the Kabbalah, in the specific subset of the Kabbalah, Gematria, if you add up the numbers of the letters, both add up to 93. So you can see those numerical signs in the events. The events of 9/11, which were pregnant with meaning and created great change in the world, which would be consistent with Crowley's definition of magic, which is to create change in the world in conformance with your will. These two monolithic buildings, the Twin Towers, were both 110 stories tall. And they also set against the skyline a huge 11, which to Crowley wasn't just a number, but also an ideogram, meaning these two different things had something. It was the symbolizing of the union of opposites, which is a very important doctrine within the occult, where two opposites come together and create something new. So those two twin towers were also referenced back to the two pillars that were in the original temple at Jerusalem, Boaz and Jachin. These two pillars that actually had occult significance. They both related to two different things, but they're also related to the pillars of Hercules, which means that that event in an occult context, the September 11th event, 2001, was a doorway to a new world, a new aeon, if you will. And that whole event can be correlated to a Wicker Man type of event where people were put in, not to their knowledge, but as a human sacrifice, turned to ash in the creation of a future world of chaos and war, just like it was said in Crowley's Book of the Law.
Interestingly, back in 2005, while the wounds of 9/11 were still fresh, George W. Bush made reference to this new order of the ages declared by our nation's founders. And he specifically stated that they were acting on an ancient hope that was meant to be fulfilled. If nothing else, this was a reference to the occult prophecies of this revived Babylon, this destined continent of occult enlightenment. But could the 9/11 ritual of the new aeon have any connection to all of this beginning to be fulfilled? Some researchers wholeheartedly believe that Bush's comments were a public declaration that the rituals of 9/11 had indeed begun this new order of the ages, or in the Crowleyan style language, the new aeon.
We have confidence because freedom is the permanent hope of mankind, the hunger in dark places, the longing of the soul. When our founders declared a new order of the ages, when soldiers died in wave upon wave for a union based on liberty, when citizens marched in peaceful outrage under the banner Freedom Now, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. History has an ebb and flow of justice, but history also has a visible direction set by liberty and the author of liberty. When the Declaration of Independence was first read in public and the Liberty Bell was sounded in celebration, a witness said it rang as if it meant something. In our time, it means something still. America in this young century proclaims liberty throughout all the world and to all the inhabitants thereof. Renewed in our strength, tested but not weary, we are ready for the greatest achievements in the history of freedom.
Continuing on the trail of occult rituals of our great nation, we find a bizarre series of events, including pedophilia and a strange archaic practice known as spirit cooking. These events have made the headlines through the Clinton-Podesta email leaks. Once again, we find high levels of government-sponsored occultists exercising Crowleyan magic, leaving their marks on society with things that are so profane, we couldn't believe it had we not had substantial red-handed proof.
As soon as spirit cooking entered into the public eye, photos were leaked showing a wide range of high-profile guests involved in these cannibalistic dinner parties. Marina Abramovic has made many rounds with celebrities and politicians as a type of spiritual guru or witch who is said to have some type of radiant energy she can impart by gazing into one's soul. It's not shocking that she has ties to Hillary Clinton, who some claim is a practicing witch and necromancer and possible channel for Hilarion.
John Podesta, of course, his brother went to some rather bizarre spiritual types of activities that were very occultic, certainly demonic, I would argue, where blood and semen and breast milk and so forth were involved by this so-called performance artists, and this was well publicized in the last couple of years. Even in their own homes, the art reportedly is of a very unsavory flavor for the average person to behold. You have these types of activities that profile someone that is rather frightening and evil, I would argue, as a lot of globalists would seem to fit that description.
Also in the WikiLeaks email, there were images of John Podesta flashing hand symbols with the number 14, the number of pieces that Set chopped Osiris into, and a fish on his other hand, which is the animal that ate the phallic 14th piece of Osiris, his corpse, his male organ. These are symbols that occultists directly connect to necromantic rituals that occultists like Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, Freemasons, and evidently Hillary staffers employ during sex magic ceremonies for one purpose: to raise or to summon Osiris, Apollo, the spirit that the Bible says will be incarnate within the Antichrist.
Whether it's seances in the White House from Lincoln to Reagan, maniacal rites of the elite, or even ritual-based observances sold to the public, America is truly fulfilling the ancient prophecies, leaving no stone unturned. But the great ritual of the ages that is yet to come is not only the pinnacle of high-level Freemasonry, but it is the capstone event, tying together the prophecies of the end of the age from all the major religions and belief systems. It is the ritual that would ignite the resurrection of the Antichrist. The raising of the Osiris will be the greatest harnessing of Luciferic energy the world has ever seen. And when Osiris rises, the end is near.
When the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy.
Applying the seething energies of Lucifer is indeed what they had in mind as they built the city of DC as a massive Masonic ritual site, illuminated in the seasonal light of the Isis-Osiris star, Sirius, and filled with demonically charged architecture, idols, and magic street layouts, ultimately setting the table for the coming main event ritual, the the raising of the final Osiris to rule the unified world kingdom. The goal of a unified world kingdom isn't anything new. And as a matter of fact, Bible prophecy foretold a specific order of kingdoms that would come leading up to the final kingdom of Antichrist. And as Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun.
You have to go back to Daniel's prophecy of the four kingdoms. There was Babylon, the Medes and Persians, Greece, and Rome. 4 world kingdoms prophesied. All of these played out exactly as it was foretold and was being fulfilled as Rome, the 4th kingdom on the list, was dominating the world while John was on Patmos. The Lord gave him the word to connect and pick up where Daniel left off. In Revelation 17:10 it says, "There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space." Each of the 7 kings have a kingdom associated with them.
Daniel gives us 4 kingdoms. The 2 prior world kingdoms that took place before the time of his prophecy were Egypt and Assyria, which makes Rome the 6th kingdom of the 7 mentioned in Revelation 17. This kingdom was currently in power when the revelation was given to John. Rome was a political, religious superpower of that day. Rome had the spirit of Antichrist, which is also known as the spirit of Babylon. You see, they were persecuting the people of God and leading the culture into spiritual fornication through idolatry. Peter confirms this idea in his epistles when he writes them from the church at Babylon, while actually being in Rome. This was a replay of the past Babylonian system while foreshadowing the final system to come, all maintaining that great horse spirit of Babylon.
Now the king that is yet to come is the one that will rule the prophesied 7th and final kingdom. This king will die by the sword according to Revelation 13. Simply put, this king will be assassinated and his death will be mourned worldwide. We're talking about a world political leader who has amassed unprecedented works in globalization and peace. One who has labored in bringing about change and breaking down the walls of political and religious division. So yes, when he is assassinated, the world will mourn his death. But then, in a miraculous resurrection back to life, he will be reanimated by the entity that ascends out of the bottomless pit. Revelation 17:8 explains this as the beast that was and is not and yet is. So he was alive, then dead, then alive again. It's through this supernatural resurrection, when the entity from the bottomless pit possesses this 7th king's dead body, that he becomes the 8th and final king, known as the Antichrist. This kingdom of the Antichrist is being built and revived today, with the majority of its policies in force being legislated and framed in our very own Washington, D.C.
How many people know that a tomb for the resurrection of Antichrist has already been prepared for his raising, and it lies beneath the U.S. Capitol dome? The United States Capitol crypt. It's a large circular room filled with 40 neoclassical Doric columns directly beneath the United States Capitol rotunda. As all mystic rabbis and Freemasons understand, the number 40 has great significance throughout the Torah, the Talmud, the mystery schools, because the number 40 represents transition or change, the concept of renewal, a new beginning. Rabbis say the number 40 has the power to lift the world into a new spiritual state. So consider how Noah's flood represented the end of one age and the birth of a new one, and it lasted for 40 days. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and came down with the stone tablets that set the rules for a new order. But according to Mackey's authoritative encyclopedia of Freemasonry, 40 is the number of days of mourning in Assyria, Phoenicia, and Egypt to commemorate the death and the burial of their sun god, as well as the period in the festivals of the resurrection of Osiris. So consider that the U.S. Capitol crypt was built originally to offer a secret entrance to a coffer that they call Washington's tomb, that's stationed next to a repository of 13 statues of the National Statuary Hall collection. Of course, the number 13 is not coincidental. It's sacred to Freemasons as the number of Osiris and his future resurrection. Revelation 13:3 describes the head of the beast being wounded unto death. Then the whole world marvels when the beast is healed and rises from the dead. In this mockery of the death and resurrection of Christ, I suggest that the most fitting place on earth For the Antichrist body to lie in state will be in the tomb of Washington beneath the floor of the Capitol dome. Why? Because the rotunda of the dome is where deceased presidents, celebrated commanding officers, even celebrated private citizens, like recently the Reverend Billy Graham, lay in state beneath the magic 72 pentagrams and the apotheosis of George Washington, America's first Osiris, to be translated into the kingdom of Osiris. But until now, nobody has laid directly beneath the rotunda in the Capitol crypt that was, according to authoritative Freemasons, prepared for America's Osiris. There is therefore no other more appropriate place for a United States president or a celebrated global leader to be placed for viewing. It was prepared and has been in waiting specifically for the magic ceremony that will give rise to the beast of Revelation. On his death, Antichrist will be placed in this magic coffer designed by Freemasons, and the 33rd degree Scottish Rite members will come there to perform the raising ceremony. Through Masonic alchemy, presidential apotheosis, that is, the leader of the United States, America's Pharaoh, being transformed into a god within the Capitol dome or the womb of Isis in sight of the obelisk of Osiris, or the Washington Monument to those who Masons call profane, the uninitiated, actually began with America's first and most revered president, Master Freemason George Washington. In fact, Masons in attendance at Washington's funeral in 1799 cast sprigs of acacia or evergreen to symbolize both Osiris's resurrection and Washington's imminent resurrection in the realm where Osiris presides. Now, according to this Masonic enchantment, Osiris, Horus, was rising within a new president in D.C. as Washington took his role as Osiris of the underworld. Now, that's further assimilated and symbolized by the three-story design of the Capitol building. Freemasons point out how the Great Pyramid of Giza was made up of three main chambers to facilitate Pharaoh's transference to Osiris, just as the Temple of Solomon was a three-sectioned tabernacle made up of the ground floor, the middle chamber, and the Holy of Holies. The U.S. Capitol building is therefore designed with three stories: Washington's tomb, the crypt, and the rotunda, capped by a dome. Each floor has significant esoteric meaning regarding apotheosis, and the so-called tomb of Washington is empty, has been since construction. So we have to ask ourselves, why didn't they just clear this area out and use it if Washington was its intended corpse, but refused to use the facility? The official narrative is that a legal issue kept the government from placing Washington's body there. However, just as the tomb of Jesus Christ was emptied before his ascension, Washington is not in his tomb because he was never meant to be. He was the forerunner, the John the Baptist sent to prepare the way for a Messiah, while he himself traveled to the home of Osiris, as depicted high overhead in the dome, in the womb of Isis, in the apotheosis of George Washington.
When you visit Washington, D.C., and you tour the Capitol building, the religion and the beliefs of the founders and proliferators of this great nation are clearly depicted in the apotheosis of George Washington. As you look up into the underbelly of the Capitol dome, seeing the heaven that George Washington is entering into, there are absolutely no Christian symbols depicted whatsoever. Jesus isn't there. Michael isn't there. There are no scriptures there, but rather you see Washington surrounded by demonic gods and goddesses of the ancient world, including Vulcan, of course, who Manly P. Hall says is the god that fills the Freemasons' hands with the seething powers of Lucifer. This is the heaven that George Washington is rising up into, inside the dome of the U.S. Capitol building. This is the heaven that the prominent founders believed in.
Interestingly, the term apotheosis of George Washington literally means the deification or glorification of George Washington. He has been deified into the heavens of the old gods. the gods worshipped by our nation's founders and forerunners, the very gods indeed of the ancients who prophesied of this Western continent being the future philosophic empire of the world.
In the context of the Capitol Dome and the 72 stars that circle Washington's apotheosis in the womb of Isis, the significance of that symbolism is very, very important, because in sacred literature, including the Bible, stars are symbolic of angels. And within Masonic Gnosticism, 72 is the number of the fallen angels, or cosmocrators, reflected in the 72 conspirators that controlled Osiris's life in Egyptian myth. These are the same entities that currently administer the affairs of Earth, according to experts in the study of the divine council, that believe that, beginning at the Tower of Babel, the world and its inhabitants were disinherited by the sovereign God of Israel and placed under the authority of 72 angels, which became corrupt and disloyal to God. But these beings quickly became worshipped on earth as gods following Babel, and they were led by Osiris, Apollo. So, consistent within the traditions, the designers of the Capitol Dome, the Great Seal of the United States, and the obelisk Washington Monument circled the apotheosis of Washington with 72 pentagrams, dedicated the obelisk 72 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and placed 72 stones on the Great Seal's uncapped pyramid, above which the Eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo stares. Those three sets of 72, combined with the imagery and occult numerology of the Osiris obelisk, the Isis dome, and the oracular Great Seal, are richly symbolic of the influence of Satan and his angels over the world, with a prophecy toward Satan's final earthly empire, the coming Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the new golden pagan age. Now, in order for the inevitable worship of Osiris to be reestablished on earth, the 72 demons that govern the nations have to be controlled, and therefore they're set in magical constraints on the Great Seal, the Washington obelisk, and the pentagram circles around the apotheosis of Washington, in order to bind and force the desired effect according to the esoteric beliefs of the Freemasons and other occultists. In The Secret Destiny of America, Manly P. Hall noted as well that the 72 stones of the pyramid on the Great Seal correspond to the 72 arrangements of the Tetragrammaton, or the four-lettered name of God in Hebrew. Those four letters can be combined in 72 combinations that result in what is called the Shimhamphorish, which represents in turn the laws, the powers, the energies of nature, according to the Masonic occultists. So the idea that the mystical name of God could be invoked to bind or loose these supernatural agents, or the powers and energies of nature, as Hall called them, is very meaningful creed inside many occult tenets, including Kabbalah and Freemasonry. And that is why the 72 stars are pentagram-shaped around the deified Freemason George Washington. Medieval books of magic, or grimoires, such as the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, not only identify the star systems Orion, which is Osiris, and Pleiades, which is Apollo, as the home of these powers, but apply great importance to the pentagram shape of the stars for binding and loosing their influence.
So the city of DC has been intentionally designed for occult rituals from the ground up, and it was strategically built with elements already in place for the resurrection ritual of the coming Osiris, the final world pharaoh. The unused crypt of George Washington, demonically charged with symbols and magic, seems to be waiting for the dead body of the Antichrist to be placed, while the entity from the bottomless pit will be conjured up by the Freemasons to take possession of this king, right in the midst of the U.S. Capitol Dome, the womb of Isis. The table has been set for some time now, awaiting the final fulfillment of the ancient esoteric prophecies, as well as the biblical prophecies of the coming philosophic empire and its supernatural world king. It isn't by chance that the United States is heralding world peace and globalization, posing as the world superpower, forcing the spreading of democracy, the very political vision of the ancient mystic philosophers. There truly isn't a more fitting location or nation for this empire to be, and for the world king to rise from. So could it be that Washington, D.C. is the great whore of Babylon who sits on many waters? Revelation 17 says the whore is a city, and the many waters that she sits on are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So I challenge you to show me one nation on earth that is made up of such multitudes of people, nations, and tongues, more so than the United States of America. This is the personification of the American creed, e pluribus unum, one out of many. We are one nation formed out of the vast and culturally diverse nations and tongues of the earth. Coupled together with the history, the rituals, and esoteric revival that has taken place on our soil, there is literally no place more fitting to be the fulfillment of the Whore of Babylon.
The Whore of Babylon, that end-time city, also sits upon 7 mountains or 7 hills, according to Revelation 17. Most scholars point to Rome when considering the city on 7 hills, but perhaps they're looking at the wrong Rome. Washington, D.C. was not only built on the pre-American land known as Rome, Maryland, but was also built on 7 hills. A new Rome, a revived Roman Empire, fueled by the spirit of Babylon, that would influence and lead the world in the last days' worship of the beast, the 7th and final kingdom, to rule them all.
The ancient pagan prophets and philosophers foretold of this great Western continent that would lead the world in a last days philosophic empire, where the mystery occult religions would resurface into the mainstream.
The secret societies have preserved and practiced these ancient esoteric beliefs.
The deep state executes the agenda on the world stage.
The rituals invoke the entities, bringing about an atmospheric change.
All of this preparing the way for the great conjuring, the resurrection of Osiris, Apollyon, the final world king, the Antichrist. And this Luciferian secret destiny is undoubtedly being fulfilled right here in America, in the belly of the beast.
Jenny, are you there?
I'm ready to go home. How about you?
Hey.
Hello. Yes, ma'am. So Jenny, had you heard any of that prior to watching that video before? I get something new out of it every time I listen to it.
I get something new too. And that's what I was thinking while I was watching it. Maybe I should just watch it like over and over and take notes each time. Because we've watched it how many times now?
Probably about 5 or 6.
Yeah. And yeah, I get something new every time. So had I heard any of it before? Bits and pieces over the last 5 years, just because of how Aviya's been leading me, calling us out. But I mean, none of it ever put together quite like they've put it together. None of it as in your face, forceful, just bringing all of it into focus, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to ask you something. How many people in America is going to believe it?
Well, that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, that's the case. When we're faced with some things that challenge what we've originally been taught, it's called cognitive dissonance that occurs in our brains, where you're like, hold up, that's too crazy to be true. That's not in line with what I've been taught. That's not what I believe. And so a lot of people will turn their heads or discard this information or feel that it is not important. However, you heard in the video, and we're going to touch on this briefly in this, but I encourage you to go research it for yourself. But there are power in numbers. Abiyah created frequencies, and everything has a frequency. And so when they were speaking about numerology and gematria, which is used a lot in Hebrew mysticism, Kabbalah, and the sorts, witchcraft is a craft. So they learn how to develop these things so that they can utilize them to adjust the frequencies in the spiritual realm. And that's what the power of prayer does for us. That's why the importance of prayer and counteracting these attempts by the enemy to see them dissolved. We even see Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, where he was held up by the Prince of Persia. So if Archangel Gabriel can be held up, how much more, can we, just mere man? And so we have to partner with our Father to counterattack the enemy and make sure that we're not turning a blind eye to this stuff. And it's very, very real. And just because we don't believe in it doesn't mean it doesn't go away.
Actually, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 years ago. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I think, I was confronted with some of this stuff, but I was kind of like that at the time, like, that is just crazy. That is conspiracy theory. You're off the wall. You don't know what you're talking about. Our government would never do anything to hurt us. They protect us. And, but the Father just kept chipping away at me, going, wake up, wake up, until finally one day I woke up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess the reason why I like to touch on politics is because it does seem to play such a big part in Christianity. When our government is really the kingdom of heaven, so we've invested all this time, all this money, all this belief, all this energy into these men that are really counteractive to everything that we stand for and everything that we believe. And so
don't you think that's just part of the veil that has covered our eyes until these last days? I mean, because there's been a veil of religion that has led us down the path to believe that these pagan practices are Christian practices. In the same way with the government, we owe our allegiance to something. And, part of our religious practice has taught us we owe that allegiance to our government to protect us and as an arm of God, when really God doesn't need an arm.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
And we see some great biblical examples of that too.
Right. And I don't think we fully realize we read over it. It's kind of like they were talking about, we read different passages and you kind of read through it and you don't realize the importance. We read over, you're not citizens of this world, you're citizens of the kingdom, but for some reason it just doesn't register that that's a real, practical, concrete meaning there.
Which is insane, because when Yeshua taught us how to pray, that was the first thing that he said. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
And so we missed that by fulfilling our earthly kingdom desires and building our own kingdoms. And again, we just see that repetitive nature of human behavior over and over again.
And most recently, and there's still a lot of hangers on in this MAGA movement, that's huge.
Yeah, it really is. And unfortunately,
right again with following Trump and believing him to be the Cyrus of this generation. And,
there'll be many people disappointed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Well, I'm going to reference the Narrowgate Web. I always reference that in our classes just because this website here, can you see that, Mama?
Yeah.
Narrowgate Web is just got a ton of information from everything creation to aliens, you name it. But this guy has really done his research. He's an engineer And he left that field to dedicate his life to the findings of things such as this to help us to come out of the darkness and into the light. But he touches on the U.S. Capitol as we just did in The Belly of the Beast. I wanted to just show you some diagrams and pictures. Here we see the owl, and the owl was discussed in Bohemian Grove. The owl for the Illuminati or for the occult is an animal that has gone to be worshipped for centuries. But the reason why is because the owl is one that can be hidden in plain sight. And so, as we know, they have a great ability to hide in their environments. But here he just gives some brief history of how significant the owl is. And then the owl can even be found microscopically on our dollar bill. And again, here he kind of shows the exact location where the owl appears overlaid, hidden behind the trees, is a building. So you can't see it if you're not looking for it, but again, it's hidden in plain sight. The U.S. Capitol building, notice how the front and east entrances building, they look like the Roman temple. And so they mentioned in The Belly of the Beast that, you know, originally Washington, D.C. was called Rome, Maryland. Now we know that the Vatican is located in Rome, and we're going to touch greatly on Catholicism in the next couple of classes. However, Rome had a great part in sculpting the United States of America. Although we were supposed to come over here for our religious freedoms to be breaking from the Catholic Church, it is mighty peculiar that we decided to replicate many of our artifacts and architectures after the Vatican and Rome. Inside the Capitol building, he touched on the dome where we can see George Washington ascending to Osiris. And the numbers are very significant in all of this imagery. And then I was just going to show you guys, let me see. Yeah. Here we see do as thou wilt. He was talking about Aleister Crowley with the hand up, the hand down. That is as above, so below. And we see a lot of this symbolism throughout, but don't really pay attention to it because we don't understand it. It's significant.
Isn't that the same hand signs that the Baphomet?
It is the same hand signs of the Baphomet.
What is the Baphomet?
The Baphomet is a non-gender. I'll show you a picture of it here.
Transgender.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the Baphomet. And so the Baphomet plays a large part in satanic worship. You can see he has a pentagram here, a goat head with the horns, as above, so below. He's pointing up, down. Everything with the kingdom of hell is inverted. So that's what, as above.
Part female, part male.
Yes, he is part female, part male. So hermaphrodite.
Mhm.
So
No.
this goes on to show just the symbolism, the Masonic symbolism throughout our dollar bill. And yeah, so we'll stop there with the narrow gate web.
I was wondering why my daddy and granddaddy hated the masonry so.
Yeah, now you know, huh? And we touched on this last week too, but just wanted to put that out there again, that the Statue of Liberty actually looks over the town of Babylon. So I know there is some, you know, variances on whether we think America is Babylon. Some people do, some people don't. I personally do. There's many references that are just too close, like the 7 horns. The Statue of Liberty has the 7 horns. He holds a gold cup in his hand. The Statue of Liberty holds a gold flame. It looks over the city of Babylon. We are a city that sits on many waters with multiple nationalities. And so it would be amazing to me if we weren't. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on again that how important it is, why we're doing this is We must be repairers of the breach. There is a gap in the wall, and we must create a defense. We must oppose an attack, counterattack, because there has been a failure to observe the law. There has been a failure to maintain conduct of holiness. And that is what Aviyah is calling us back to, is a time of returning to the ancient paths of holiness and consecration and a people set apart for him.
Right. Right.
Amen. Amen. All right. So with that, I'm going to transition into a little bit of church history. We're going to look at Constantine. We're going to look at some things that were transpired and actually changed. And let me pull that up here for us. Let's see. Buddy, did you need something? I don't know. You're gonna have to look. I'm on a Zoom right now. Okay. Okay. Oh goodness, where is it? Well, sorry about this.
What do you? What do
My
you?
my presentation for I had it pulled up, but okay, well, let me go here. Okay, so I guess what we'll do, since I can't find that presentation, I'm going to go ahead and start with the dark side of the entertainment industry. And this all plays into how the church kind of got off track. The entertainment industry is probably one of the largest things that has helped contribute to the church evolving into a more secular system, which is very unfortunate.
Thank God I come when I did.
Amen.
Is normal, like this goes on all the time.
In Christ.
I'm not here for anyone's entertainment.
Jake from 2.5 Men means nothing.
Put God first. I love God, that's my thing.
Like Jesus said, I come to the door and knock.
In the mighty name of Jesus, I thank you.
He was arrested in December or late November, and then he got out June. 6 months.
I mean, 6 months is a joke. It's a joke for what happened.
I remember you asked me if I ever did anything with the guy before.
Yeah, a long time ago.
And that's when you... Oh wait, that's when you gave me my first blowjob, right?
You're not recording this, right?
No, I'm not.
He just showed me porn, and he told me, oh, these are clients having sex with their managers. These 60-year-old men having sex with 14-year-old clients. He just told me this is normal, like this goes on all the time. This is what you have to do. Everybody does this, everybody who manages children. And he would tell me that constantly, oh no, you like it.
I never would have done anything with you if you hadn't expressed interest. That situation that happened at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids didn't want it.
Yeah, but I didn't didn't at 12. I was not interested. I remember that night you did pull out your penis in the car, and I was scared because you asked me if I wanted to touch it. If I didn't do it, I wouldn't go further in the music career, or I thought everyone did it.
I was like, I don't like music anymore. I don't want to do anything with the industry, nothing.
You would tell me everyone did it and that it's normal and natural.
I'm sure I said that. I mean, it is a natural function.
It's Hollywood. People do what they want in Hollywood. And if you're a big enough star or a big enough director or you're making enough money for these people, you can do whatever you want.
The only white people that thank Jesus are Republicans and ex-crackheads.
Jesus can my as well. A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. So all I can say is, "F- Jesus, this award is my God now!"
Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation. And even if we did have only Christians, if we expelled every non-Christian, whose Christianity would we teach in the schools?
Clap for that, you stupid.
Thank the devil.
Thank you to Satan for giving me inspiration.
I never thought that we could say that, but thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. We are here because of you. If you're not enjoying that, say something now. All right, we're keeping doing that.
I can tell you that the #1 problem in Hollywood was and is and always will be pedophilia.
Do you like teenage girls? When you say teenage, how are we talking?
They're some of the richest, most powerful people in this business. I was surrounded by them.
I can tell you one story about my evangelism experience with Brad Pitt, and this happened on the movie Moneyball in August of 2010. And I approached Brad Pitt at the end of the day because I wanted to evangelize him, and he was in a rush to really get out of there, so I'm thinking, maybe I should at least give him a tract so that he can read the tract and hopefully get saved, or there will be a seed that's planted. So I gave him one of these $1 million bills. So I just said, hey, Brad, here, this is for you, a little tip. And Brad Pitt was looking at it, he was so shocked. He was like, wow, what is this? What is this? Yeah, then I said to him, well, take a look at the message in the back whenever you get a chance. So he says, all right, I definitely will. So then he revved up his golf cart and just went straight back to his dressing room. And I thought everything was great since his reaction was so positive. But then about a week later, I got a message from my casting agency stating that I got fired, and they wouldn't even tell me the reason why.
We get constant advertisement for strip clubs and other things like that.
But then we bring up the name of Jesus, we're told to be quiet, quiet that down.
So it just pretty much shows you how the gospel is received in Hollywood and what you can expect for sharing your faith, whether it's in Hollywood or in the world.
Good afternoon, Hollywood. My name is Steve, and I'm here with my friend Tony right here. We're in Hollywood, and it's been a long time since I've actually been to this part of town. And we're just here basically sharing with you the good message of the gospel, and we're both from different churches. He's from Reality LA.
In your experience, are there very many Christians in Hollywood, or are they very active in sharing their faith?
A lot of the real Christians, are they actually going out and doing what God commands them to do, which is to seek and save the lost? And based on my observation, I haven't really seen too many people going around sharing their faith except Jonathan Kahn, who I met and who influenced me. And I do know that there are a few people working behind the stages trying to get that done, but as of right now, that's what I'm trying to do, is to encourage more people to step up and boldly share their faith so that more celebrities and just everybody in Hollywood can be saved.
Thank you. I decided to show that in particular video because it touches on a few things. Pedophilia being probably the most prevalent, prominent, important. You know, I don't know about you guys, but when I was younger, one of my dreams was to get my daughter casted by Disney. She was just the cutest little girl. And we lived in Florida, and we got to go to Disney World all the time. And she was just a ball of energy. And so just, you know, just knew that she'd make it big on one of their sitcoms one day, and we could retire and live happily ever after and be millionaires, right? No, that's not what we're called to do or be. But it's something that many of us as moms had aspired for. You know, there's many talent companies, talent acquisition companies out there, headhunting for models and for the next biggest actor for Disney or Nickelodeon or whatever. I don't think what we realize when we pursue these kinds of things, number one, it's extremely vain. But number two, we're sacrificing our children to Baal. These industries are full of pedophiles who are looking to feed on the fear of children. And like we saw in Belly of the Beast, the things like adrenaline, like fear, actually breed evil. And so Hollywood being a very dark place, I had the opportunity to minister there and go to some studios and do some intercessory prayer. It is a very dark spiritually place, exactly replicated after many ancient artifacts in Babylon itself. And so when Hollywood was architected or infrastructured, it was done so with an agenda to replicate it after the original design of Babylon, because at the end of the day, Babylon, Ra is the sun god, is their god, and who they look to, you know, draw their power from. So us as Christians, you know, and I'm very guilty. I used to be a huge fan of, say, Beyonce and of Disney, had every Disney movie you could think of. But as we've been going along and the Father's been faithful to reveal and expose the abominations that Christians have partaken in, Hollywood and the entertainment industry is one of those. Can we pray for them? Yes. But are we to partake with them? No. Can we intercede that many would be saved? Yes. Can we go evangelize there? Yes. But should we get involved? No. Can we produce positive things? Yes. But does it have to be done in Hollywood? No. Do we need to look like the world to do it? No. Because our Creator can create anything greater than any satanic force can. And there are numerous testimonies of actors and of musicians stating that they call forth spirits to embark on them, to embody them, so that they can create, so that they can act, so that they can sing. And when we turn these guys on our TVs, These TVs act as portals and literally allow those demonic forces into our homes, into our minds, and our eyes are the windows to our soul. So garbage in, garbage out.
That's the reason my dad and granddad didn't want us to have a TV.
That's right. And they knew better. They really did.
Isn't there something to even the name Hollywood?
There is. It has to do, and I think they touched on that in The Belly of the Beast. But the holly berry.
Yeah.
And then the wood has to do with wormwood, I want to say, but I don't remember what exactly that means. Okay, this next video is a brief video on actual Hollywood. On Disney, excuse me, and why Disney specifically should not be something that
wondered what actors and actresses do when they have to get in shape really fast for a movie.
Disney is a mastermind when it comes to creating seemingly family-friendly products. Whether it's a film or a cartoon or an amusement park, Disney has convinced the masses that it's simply good, clean fun. But at a closer examination, something more sinister is underneath that innocent persona. A dark force not to be trifled with. You know, Disney has never been shy to showcase occult themes, but it seems that most of the content aimed at the young is becoming blatantly evil. Take, for instance, the movie called Descendants. The logo alone should deter any awake Christian from wasting even a precious moment upon watching this. The plot should even sound the alarm that much more.
The next generation of villains arrives. Jay, son of Jafar.
What are you doing? It's called stealing. It's like buying whatever I want, except it's free.
Evie, daughter of Evil Queen.
Is everybody at home as pretty as you?
I like to think I'm the fairest of them all.
Beauty is paid.
Carlos, son of Cruella de Vil.
This thing is a killer! This is a vicious, rabid pack animal. Hey, who told you that? My mother.
And now, daughter of Maleficent. They're at their best when doing their worst.
This glamorizes being evil and makes it fashionable. In 2014, Disney made this story called Maleficent, a very satanic film that mesmerized many young people in its spell.
Well, well. There is evil in this world. Hatred and revenge.
The dictionary defines maleficent as doing evil or harm, or harmfully malicious. Maleficent means destroyers of reputation. You know, the Bible also speaks of a malicious being that seeks to do us harm. In 1 Peter 5 verse 8, it tells us to be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. If you consider the comments left on Maleficent's movie trailer's YouTube page, it reveals the effect that it has on its viewers. One commenter, ironically named Christian Alexia, writes this: I usually like the good people in movies, but how can I not like this wonderful villain, which the role is played by Angelina Jolie? The Bible is very clear about sorcery and witchcraft, and warns us to have nothing to do with it. The Bible says in Deuteronomy 18, verse 10 through 12, There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. On this verse alone, Christians have no business watching any of these films that contain the very elements that are an abomination to God. But perhaps you're thinking, I would never let my children watch such a film. I only let my children watch the Disney classics. So let's back up and let's review some of those Disney classics. The story of Snow White includes witches, magic mirrors, sorcery, and spells.
Slave in the magic mirror, come from the farthest space. Through wind and darkness, I summon thee. Speak!
Cinderella, even in the opening scene, they tell you that it's an enchanting story about magic. The Bible is clear. No enchanter, no magic. In The Little Mermaid, there's witches, there's spells. In the story of Pocahontas, she consults a familiar tree spirit to guide her.
But Grandmother Willow, what is my path? How am I ever going to find it?
Your mother asked me the very same question.
She did? What did you tell her?
I told her to listen. All around you are spirits, child. They live in the earth, the water, the sky. If you listen, they will guide you.
Jasmine is supposed to marry the prince, but instead she falls in love with the thief. This also contains magic and sorcery. Mulan's best friend is a little red dragon who lies to her and speaks to the dead, which is necromancing. The Prince and the Frog is all about voodoo.
I got voodoo, I got hoodoo, I got things I ain't even tried. And I got friends on the other side. He's got friends on the other side.
And of course, Mickey is the sorcerer himself. Now, according to the Disney Wiki, magic is used throughout all of the Disney universe. This article goes on to say, the morality of magic is how it's used. Some use it for good, others for evil. And here are the types of magic that are used in Disney films: witchcraft, sorcery, voodoo, dragon magic, fairy magic, Disney magic, and these are the known magic users. The Disney universe beholds a number of magic users: mages, sorcerers, witches, wizards, coming in all shapes and sizes. There are some who use magic for good and benevolent purposes, and others for wicked and selfish or fiendish goals. And some that are indifferent to good and evil, and thus use magic for their own reasons regardless of good or evil. Here is a list in which Disney characters use good or evil magic. Now, I'm sure that some of you may recognize a few of these names in this list. But once again, the Bible is very clear. We are to have nothing to do with these things, period. In fact, the Bible describes these practices as an abomination to the Lord, meaning that God hates these things. And if God hates them, do you think that we should have any involvement in watching them? You see, the classic cartoons open up the doorway for the darker movies down the road. It makes your heart grow fondly towards anything that Disney puts out. If you still question whether these things are good or bad, we've created a whole documentary called Magic Kingdom that would answer many of your questions. It's available on our website. Magic is sorcery. The Bible is full of examples of why we should have nothing to do with it. For instance, in 2 Chronicles chapter 33, verse 6, King Manasseh is condemned for his many evil practices, including sorcery. And he burned his sons as an offering in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and used fortune-telling and omens and sorcery, and dealt with mediums and necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. The Apostle Paul also lists sorcery as one of the many sinful practices that mark the lives of unbelievers. Now, the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, things like these. I warn you, as I've warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Galatians 5:19 through 21. Romans 1:32 states very clearly, who knowing the judgment of God, they that which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. If we simply enjoy the things that the Bible defines as sin, for example, magic and sorcery, we are worthy of that same judgment by taking pleasure in watching others commit those sins. Well, that pretty much sums up quite a few of Disney's princess movies. It's truly sugarcoating the occult. So let's fast forward to today, and let's talk about Frozen. Most likely, many of you have seen this movie, and if you haven't, I'm sure you've heard the songs because your nieces and nephews have sung every word 1,000 times. Remember, the devil is the most subtly created being there ever was. Deception often lies amongst the most seemingly innocent things. Error usually piggybacks off of truth. And despite the obvious reasons not to watch the movie, such as magic and sorcery, the film was praised for its noble qualities. Your actions affect others, the need for self-control, the power of sacrifice, and don't judge a book by its cover. But in all this truth, there lies a dangerous error. When Elsa decides to build her own ice castle, she sings that song, Let It Go. And the lyrics say, "No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free." This is a most dangerous philosophy to plant into children's minds. You see, the 10 Commandments are our only guide for right and wrong. Where there is no rules, there is only chaos. In fact, it's not only Disney that promotes this confusion of right and wrong. The Despicable Me series is all about making the villain as the hero. The poster for the movie says, when the world needed a hero, they called a villain. When in reality, the world does need a hero, a savior. We need Jesus, but not a cosmic villain or the devil. You see, Hollywood ropes viewers in with these cute, funny little characters. But if you just open your eyes to the real message of the movies, you will see. In the movie The Minions, their sole mission in life is to follow and find the most evil master that they could find. And they end up at a convention for evil villains called Villicon, which they seek out a supervillain.
Do you know what happens inside your body when you eat fast food? It turns into pounds and pounds of toxic poop.
Named Scarlet Overkill.
You're going to VillainCon, aren't you?
VillainCon! I'm gonna get all my favorite villains to sign my magazine. Scarlet Overkill! If I was a minion, that's who I'd want to work for.
Welcome to VillainCon, the biggest gathering of criminals anywhere.
Any evil talents?
Not bad.
What about you? Any evil talents?
Hello! La 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 la. Eh?
That's not evil or a talent.
Ah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the supervillain we've all been waiting for, Scarlet Overkill!
Doesn't it feel so good to be bad?
What amazes me about movies like this is you see those words come out of her mouth. Doesn't it feel so good to be bad? And everybody is cheering. Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Glorifying evil and making it look appealing is exactly how the devil tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. And now we have cartoons such as Dracula as the protagonist, the main character. You see, there's lots of animations that are coming out that even use biblical language, such as the Book of Life. They're filled with images of death and hell.
All the world is made of stories, and all of those stories are right here in the Book of Life. But the greatest story begins on the Day of the Dead. A day when spirits pass between worlds and anything can happen.
The greatest story ever told is that of our Savior's birth. You see, when you watch this, it sends mixed messages to any Christian who watches these things. Confusion seems to be the common thread between many of these stories. Most of these examples that have just been shown to you have made the devil the attractive savior. If you or your children spend countless hours watching these types of animations and cartoons, the chances are that your desire for Christ's righteousness will be tainted. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 3, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, and having a form of godliness, but denying its power. And from such people turn away. By beholding, we become changed. When we watch these things, we take on their characteristics. And from such evil, turn away your eyes from these.
Okay, so this was convicting for me. The first time that I had this realization, and I just had to repent, because I was always wondered why my daughter was kind of drawn towards darkness. But I raised her on this stuff. I mean, she probably watched Aladdin and Cruella de Vil over 100 times, and The Little Mermaid. So, you know, these, and Snow White, but they all do, they glorify evil. Like he was saying, doesn't it feel so good to be bad? And we know the effects of music on the brain. We have a tendency to remember things. That's why we do, when we're teaching multiplication, we do songs. When we're teaching ABCs, we do songs, because we have ability to retain if it's got this catchy jingle to it. So these Disney songs have catchy jingles, but unfortunately, the jingles override the messaging, and that messaging is entering into our minds subliminally, and it's creating our ideologies and our worldviews. So when we grow up and we are called to surrender our complete lives and walk in a life of holiness, this is contradictive to everything we've kind of been brainwashed with the Disney movies and the Hollywood feature films, etc. And so I know I used to personally view, when people spoke like this, oh, they're just being religious, you know, but now I'm actually seeing the ramifications and the consequences of me not listening to my father in regards to these types of things a long time ago. Probably could have prevented some diversions.
And what's so bad, all of that's going on today among our little ones.
Yes.
And it's sad.
It really is. Their superheroes are made to be villains and wicked things of this world. Yes, ma'am.
In a way, even if it's not a ritual sacrifice, in a way, in a figurative way, that is just like walking in and handing your children to Baal.
It really is.
You know, giving them up to the dark side.
It really, really is. And it's unfortunate that a lot of us don't exactly see it that way. But it couldn't be farther from the truth.
And you know, I often wondered why my dad didn't want me watching any TV when I was younger.
Yeah, and now it makes sense, huh?
Now I understand. It's awful.
Or going to the movies.
Yeah, or going to the movies.
She wasn't allowed to go to movies. Yeah.
So I know what they were trying to teach me.
Yes. Okay, let me see if this is, yes. Okay, so I'm going to touch a little bit before we got a few extra minutes here. We're about 15 minutes out. So I'm going to get started and touch a little bit more on just leading up to the changes in the church and how they kind of got that way. But cognitive dissonance, we talked about this a little bit earlier. This is why people get upset when their beliefs are challenged. A mental conflict occurs when beliefs are contradicted by new information. This conflict activates areas of the brain involved in personal identity and emotional response to threats. The brain alarms go off when a person feels threatened on a deep personal and emotional level, causing them to shut down and disregard any rational evidence that contradicts what they previously regarded as truth. So a good example of this would be kind of, well, I'm not for Trump, so I don't say this because I am for Trump. I say this because this is a good example of cognitive dissonance. There's no doubt in my mind that this election was stolen. The evidence is there. I did not vote for neither candidate, so I am not biased or could care less which one wins. They're both evil. But cognitive dissonance,
most evil.
yes, cognitive dissonance wouldn't allow many people who were Democrats or who were opposing parties or who just detested Trump to see the evidence, which was very blatant, that the election was stolen. The votes were miscounted. There were illegal actions that took place in the counting rooms and in the voting booths and in the voting facilities that would have never stood in the past. However, the dislike and the discourse and just the heightened combativeness for this particular election, cognitive dissonance occurred in many that would not even allow them to accept the truth and the reality for what it is because they wanted their candidate to win. So cognitive dissonance, when a person is not willing to stop and say, okay, this is deeply connected with my worldview and my beliefs, but there's evidence here that shows that my beliefs may be off or may be wrong. And I need to look at the evidence, and one has to will themselves to look at the evidence because it is so contradictive or contrary to what they've been taught or what they've chosen to believe. But us as truth bearers, us as believers, we're called to study to show ourselves approved. We're called to go back to the beginning. We're called to understand the foundations. And for many years, we've just been spoon-fed. What's been given to us, we've received. The doctrines that's been passed down, we've taken as truth. The word that's been handed to us, we've taken as infallible and uncompromised. Yes, Mama?
We've become lazy.
And that too, we have become a microwave generation, for sure.
I never will, truth is light. Light dispels darkness. And back in the early 80s, I remember being in a class and studying and reading and praying and all that, asking for guidance. And I remember the Lord speaking to me and telling me, it is one thing to seek truth for the sake of truth, but it's quite a different thing to seek a truth to support your version of what you want truth to be.
Right.
And that has stuck with me. And I've always asked him, don't let my version of what I want this to be get in the way, please. And I think that's something we all have to be cognitive of, especially in these times, because they're going to get darker and darker. And so we have to ask ourselves, am I trying to support what I want things to look like, or am I trying to hear what the truth really is and follow that?
At all costs.
Right.
That's another thing. We haven't been taught to count the cost and weigh the cost,
Right.
and so that, because we don't understand the seriousness of that, we don't take the initiative to really seek out those things, to drill down, to get to the bottom.
That's the reason our religion has just dribbled away.
Yes, ma'am. It's been watered down and watered down and watered down until we're now the 2 Timothy chapter 3 church of have a form of godliness but lack the power thereof. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. This is the cognitive dissonance thing I was just reading. I'm going to touch on pharmakia just briefly, or pharmakia. Pharmakia, for those of you that don't know, is the Greek word that we get the pharmaceuticals. We see in Revelations 18:23, for your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. That word sorcery is actually translated in the Greek to pharmakia, where we get our root word again, pharmacy, which literally means to drug or poison. So with the pharmakia question, I want us to challenge our cognitive dissonance may occur here. Where on earth did we get away from using plants and natural medicines to pharmaceuticals? Plants and natural medicines do not have 500 side notes of different counteractions that can happen when you take them, where pharmaceuticals, we get a long laundry list of possible deaths and poisonings that could possibly happen in regards to injecting or ingesting the pharmaceuticals. So
can I answer that?
Yes, you absolutely may.
You asked a question. You said, when did we get away from that? We got away from that when we got away from the word.
Yes.
We got away from believing what the word said, where God tells us, I am the God who heals you.
Amen.
I am the great physician. For some reason, we had rather believe men than believe God, and God has become a myth. And we have replaced him with the things we can touch, see, and feel. So when we got away from the word, it's when we got away from the true healing power and substances that he gave us to provide that for us.
Yes.
Black
so,
drop.
Go ahead, Mama.
Black drop.
It was one of the things.
Castor oil.
Oh, yeah. Yum, yum.
Chamomile. No.
But okay, so in context, this verse basically explains that drugs are poison. And if we use them, we're deceived. And over 50% of Americans take prescription drugs. The silver fillings that we get put in our mouths by the dentist emit mercury vapor 24/7. Aluminum and mercury are in vaccines that we're vaccinating our children with. Fluoride is in water, supposedly helping our teeth, but calcifying our pineal glands. And we breathe in heavy metals and toxins from chemtrails that they're spraying over us every day. This is a brief video on chemtrails. I'm going to skip over that, but most of the white lines that you see in the sky are due to us literally being poisoned. So we're going to close with this video on the Roman Emperor Constantine. His reign was after Yeshua, about 306 to 337. He was inserted after a tyrant, Nero, a couple hundred years after. He came and was kind of a breath of fresh air to the people, because Nero had persecuted the called out assembly for so long. When Constantine came, he was kind of like a savior, in the sense that he stopped persecuting the people, but in that he intermeshed and intertwined many pagan practices with the called out believers, and even changed some significant high holy days and Sabbaths that Aviyah or God chose to put in place since the beginning. And so we're going to take a brief look into history about who this man was, and next session we will go into a greater depth.
Early Christianity is a story of struggle, persecution, and martyrdom, often at the hands of the ruling government. Yet less than 300 years after the founding of the church, Emperor Constantine adopted Christianity as the official religion of the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Who was Constantine, and why did he claim to be a Christian? At the dawn of the 4th century, Constantine began his ascent in both power and prestige. He was...
Okay, hang on. I guess can't see the video here. Oh, poo. My screen was not shared. I am so sorry about that. All right, I'm gonna start it over.
The story of early Christianity is a story of struggle, persecution, and martyrdom, often at the hands of the ruling government. Yet less than 300 years after the founding of the church, Emperor Constantine adopted Christianity as the official religion of the most powerful empire the world had ever known. Who was Constantine, and why did he claim to be a Christian? At the dawn of the 4th century, Constantine began his ascent in both power and prestige. He was proclaimed emperor in AD 306, and by AD 324, he had solidified control over the entire Roman Empire. And in the following year, he called the First Council of Nicaea. This council formally established a number of doctrinal changes that had been adopted in practice over the previous 2 centuries. The nature of God and the celebration of Easter were 2 key items on the agenda. It was Constantine's prior signing of the Edict of Milan that eventually brought peace after more than 2 centuries of religious persecution. To understand the scope of this change in philosophy, we must first look back to the beginning in the 1st century. The persecution of Christians by the Roman Empire started under the rule of Emperor Nero. More than 200 years later, by the end of the 3rd century, rank persecution of Christians had become commonplace throughout the empire. Christians who refused to recant their faith and worship both the emperor and Roman pagan gods were tortured and killed. In the mid-3rd century, under the rule of Decius, an edict was issued that forced those claiming to be Christians to either worship Roman gods or face execution. Decius's religious campaign was intended to restore the empire to its former glory by uniting everyone under their ancestral religion. How then did Roman society's opinion of Christianity change so significantly to culminate in Constantine's adopting the religion? The answer to this lies in the vast changes that took place in Christian practices between the 1st and 4th century. Over time, the leaders of the church began accepting or at least tolerating new doctrine. In the 2nd century, Clement of Alexandria left a vast body of work that, according to Justo L. Gonzalez in Volume 1 of The Story of Christianity, Clement uses the Greek doctrine of logos to call Christians to be open to truth and philosophy. The 2nd century Bishop of Rome, later known as Pope Victor I, is well known for the Quartodeciman controversy, where he pushed for the excommunication of Christians who kept Passover as opposed to the adopted pagan fertility festival held on Sunday, later known as Easter. Victor sent out a letter to be distributed among all the Christian churches, where he warned that the Lord's resurrection from the dead should be celebrated on no other day than on Sunday. In response to this instruction, Polycrates, the Bishop of Smyrna, wrote that he kept the Passover on the 14th of the month according to the Gospel, without deviating from, but following the rule of faith. Threats do not frighten me, for greater ones than I have said God must be obeyed rather than men. Tertullian of Carthage was an early Christian author around the turn of the 3rd century. He was influenced by Stoic philosophy, and it was his writings on the concept of God being a trinity that eventually became the hallmark of orthodoxy. The Christian faith underwent a dramatic transformation, adopting pagan practices and symbolism such as that of the ancient Egyptian symbol of life, which was used to picture the cross. The religion had changed so much that by the time Constantine ordered his soldiers to use this symbol on their shield on the eve of the Battle of Milvian Bridge in AD 312, Christianity had become fully immersed in pagan practices and traditions. Having been raised as a pagan devotee of the unconquered sun, Constantine's adoption of the transformed Christian faith effectively blended his ancestral pagan religion with what Christianity had become. Constantine seems to have thought that the unconquered sun and the Christian God were compatible, perhaps two views of the same supreme deity. On March 7th, AD 321, Constantine declared that, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed." Sunday worship, as opposed to Sabbath day observance, was later canonized by the Council of Laodicea in AD 363. It was Constantine who gave the stamp of approval for all the transformation that took place between the 1st and 4th centuries. Unlike Decius, who sought to unite the empire under paganism, Constantine managed to unite the empire under the guise of Christianity. He effectively set the stage for all the faux Christian practices you see emanating from Rome today. Dr. William Durant wrote in Volume 3 of The Story of Civilization, "Christianity did not destroy paganism, it adopted it. From Egypt came the ideas of a divine trinity, personal immortality of reward and punishment, the adoration of mother and child. Christianity was the last great creation of the ancient pagan world." If you have ever wondered why the Catholic Church and the Protestant offshoots observe religious events and practices that are not found in the Bible, then you only need to look to Constantine and the steady adoption of pagan idolatry to find the source. I'm Jonathan Riley for Tomorrow's World Viewpoint. Subscribe and click the notification bell to receive
Tell her we're not hearing her.
Shoot, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. With that video, we're introduced to the many things that Constantine had contribution in changing. However, he was never given the permission to change, the commandment to change. And who on earth does this man think he is that he can change the days and the ways of Yah? So we'll look further into that next session. And we'll talk a little bit about the history of the holidays that we practice now, such as Christmas and Easter. And I think many of you will be shocked as to know of their pagan origin and how the Christian church has put them into practice. Mom, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. Good job.
Good. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, well, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week at 4 p.m.
Love you.
Love you too.